About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we wait.
By a whole grade.
I've improved.
Improved.
By a whole grade.
By a whole grade.
By a whole grade.
My teacher isn't just Mr. Maddock. It's a whole teaching team made up of James, Mike and Marta.
My classroom's all about doing and applying. My days standing at the front of the classroom with a PowerPoint are long gone.
I master every concept by learning at my own pace.
I spend 100% of my class time interacting and supporting individual students.
I move on only when the moment is right for me, not the whole class.
I know what each and every student is mastering and struggling on at every moment.
I know exactly what I need to learn next, and I can go back and review material at any time.
I spend my teaching time supporting and inspiring, not planning, delivering and marking.
I can learn from anywhere at any time.
I can switch off when school closes, knowing they are learning from the best.
My teacher has my homework marked before I get to class.
I set every piece of homework at the start of the year.
I'm 2 weeks ahead of my expected progress.
I can track everyone's progress with a swipe of a finger.
I can track my own progress and set my own targets.
I now have time to focus on developing the skills of every learner in my classroom.
I know exactly what it means to explain, evaluate and analyse, and I'm not afraid of any exam.
My lessons are now far more about the skills and the application, not just the content itself. I've completely remodeled what it means to be a teacher in my classroom.
Okay, now we should have sound. Okay,
Yes,
that was a
we've got
bit of a false start. Forgive us, folks. We had to readjust some of our shots before we started today, and we didn't attach the sound back to one. So, hey, we're live. These things happen sometimes. So thanks for being patient. But, that's how it goes. So, session number 12, I think, of the A-level courses. So we are today studying some learning theories. We're specifically going to look at one behaviorist theory, and we're going to look at one social learning theory. So we're going to have a look at operant conditioning, one of the behaviorist theories. I know some of you study classical conditioning as well. And we're going to have a look at Bandura's observational learning or social learning theory in the second part of what we're going to do today. So for me, the key is how we apply that to kind of a sporting performance training context, and we'll try and develop that with you today. I'm sure we'll do a decent job. Well, hopefully we'll do a decent job. So a couple of reminders, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's been going really well. Subscribership is going up, and we want you to be part of that community. We have massive plans for this YouTube community, so you should be part of it, please. So whether you are a student or a teacher at any level, you should be subscribing, please. So please do so. It's free, and it makes a difference to us. So please support our work in doing that. Secondly, you should have the notes pages available. If you're watching this either live and you've got to scrabble around and get them, or you're watching it on demand, the notes pages are just down there. But if you're in the description, but if you're obviously in a classroom right now, you've probably been given the notes pages by your teacher. We are going to be applying, as ever, our topic areas to our athlete profiles. So be prepared for that today. Now, we've also got a bit of interaction for you today. Marta's going to quickly show you how to do that, Marta.
Sure. So this is how you can interact with us through our website. So all you need to do is go to theeverlearner.com, click on News, go to the interactive questions section, and on here you can find all the questions, and today's
Psychology
is learning. You click on here and you answer the question, and don't forget to press on submit.
Great. So please do that, folks. We enjoy receiving those. We enjoy publishing really nice examples of those as well. And yeah, get those into us. Teachers, get your students involved. Get them submitting their answers to us. Do it as a class activity. It could be really, really positive. And secondly, Marta, second way to interact?
Through our hashtag revision break. What are you doing during your break? Are you, I don't know, washing your dog? Are you, I don't know, anything you're doing? Send us a picture and let us know.
Washing your dog.
Why not?
Are you washing your dog?
If you're at home, it's something, you could do in 3 minutes.
But we do enjoy receiving those photos. Make sure you've got the permission of anyone in the photo that you've taken to be sent in to us, and make sure that they've agreed to be in the photo so we can display it. We always display those photos in the stream. So, all that being understood, I think we're ready. Marta, are you ready to go over there?
I am ready. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Okay, let us focus on operant conditioning. And the first point I want to address with you is I want to kind of give you a sentence which I think is going to really help you to understand this. And it is this one. It is a set stimulus elicits a set response. Okay, and you might want to sort of read that through a few times. So we're saying here that if we train somebody to do so, we can take a particular circumstance, a stimulus or a combination of stimuli, and we can encourage that performer to produce a set response in that situation or with those specific circumstances around them. So this becomes very close to a notion of programming. Okay, now some of you also study classical conditioning, so I don't want to go too much down that line. Some of you don't. But programming, almost like in a computer design, we have a set of instructions out, and the computer, the program, produces a set response. And we're thinking about learning through operant conditioning in this way. We also want to say about this particular sort of assumption is that this can be, and get ready for these words here, it can be grooved, and my O's look like, or my V, that make a V a bit more V-like, can be grooved, honed, or sometimes what we call overlearned. And what we mean by that is if we repeat and practice this response to this particular stimulus or set of stimuli over and over again, it becomes groove, honed, or a nice term we can pick up is overlearned. Now, you might want to immediately think about a weakness in this particular mentality, this particular learning paradigm, in the sense that we are not writing down here that the performer understands the reason why they're doing what they're doing. They've just learned to respond that way. So we can automatically produce a criticism of this model. Now, we also want to describe this as learning through experimentation. Learning through experimentation. And when we say experimentation, what we mean by that really is a key term for us with regard to operant conditioning, and that is the notion of trial and error learning. Okay, trial and error learning. And really what we are ideally looking to seek here is a set of circumstances and conditions which drive the individual to produce the right response, the correct response in a particular set of circumstances. So we've got this idea that we've got a set stimulus elicits a set response. We've got this idea that we learn through experimentation or trial and error learning. where I really want to go through this is what we call manipulating the environment. Manipulating the environment. And really we're talking about the coach or the trainer here, that the coach or the trainer is going to produce an environmental set of conditions which bring about this trial and error learning to bring about the correct set response to those stimuli. Okay, so we call it manipulating the environment. We can refer to this as behavior shaping. Behavior shaping. And we can refer to it as, or we can describe it as needing reinforcement. And we can often say repetition, much of which in a second. Let me write that properly. Need for reinforcement. And I'll talk to you about reinforcement in a moment. Okay, so we've got these central ideas. We've got these central ideas of structuring a learning environment to produce a set of stimuli which elicit a particular set of response, and the learner gets to that correct response through trial and error learning. The coach ensures that happens through manipulating the environment and shaping the behavior of the learner. And what we're saying here is that this learning needs reinforcement. Now, I want to focus this for a moment on what we'd call the SR bond. Now, of course, what we've talked about up here, a set stimulus elicits a set response. We can refer to that as the SR bond, or what we're going to call now the stimulus response bond. Now, really, what I tend to think about with this theory is what we're looking for is almost the stimulus correct response bond, the stimulus correct response bond. We're looking for the athlete to produce the correct responses to a particular set of stimuli. Now, as we've said before, of course, what we're trying to do is we're trying to strengthen this bond, okay? So assuming for a second that we are looking at the correct response to a set of stimuli, we want to strengthen and thicken this bond between the two things so that reproduction of that correct response is much more likely. And we can only do that according to operant conditioning through the trial and error manipulated environment behavior shaping model. But we can also strengthen this bond, as I said a moment ago, through the processes of reinforcement. And I want to just quickly address reinforcement with you now, okay? So let's address reinforcement, all right? So reinforcement, we effectively have three types, okay? We have positive reinforcement. Now, the important role of positive reinforcement is it performs a function that we describe as strengthening the SR bond. So it's exactly what I just described, strengthening the SR bond, okay? And of course, when we're talking about positive reinforcement, we are talking about things like encouragement. We are talking about things like praise. We are talking about affirmations, things that inform the participant that their response was the correct one. And of course, what's the outcome of that? Well, as we said a moment ago, this bond between the set of stimuli and the response becomes stronger, thicker, more dominant, and therefore the correct response is more likely to occur. So positive reinforcement can be really, really effective for that reason, can be super effective for that reason. Now, negative reinforcement is something completely different. Negative reinforcement we describe, as what we describe as removing the criticism. Removing the criticism. Okay, so removing the criticism. And what we're saying by this, so if you think about it, what we would do there is, let's say we've put a performer in a set of, let's say we've taken Tom here and we've put him in a set of circumstances where we're looking for him to produce the correct forehand technique, up down the line forehand drive shot, for example, and we've set the situation up so perhaps he's hitting into a channel, perhaps he's moving to his left through a pair of cones. We're shaping the environment in that way. And of course, what we're going to do is that as he makes mistakes with that, we're going to be saying to Tom, okay, Tom, try and move your left foot first, please. Okay, Tom, this time I want you to rotate your core a little bit further. Okay, this time, Tom, I want you to follow through with a higher follow through over your right shoulder, and so on and so on and so on. But at the point where he does the skill correctly, we remove this criticism. And this is a super important point. Get ready for it. It forms the SR bond. It forms the SR bond. The SR bond is actually formed within that environment. So in other words, the first time the correct response is initiated, the criticism is removed, and all of a sudden we've got a new stimulus response bond. It needs strengthening, which is why at the moment of negative reinforcement we'll often include positive reinforcement as a replacement. Now punishment, I'm going to do this not in yellow, so it's not going to show through, so I'll do it in a blue colour. So punishment is a completely different concept, of course. It is the idea of weakening an SR bond. Okay, so if an SR bond has been built up by mistake, we've got the incorrect response to a particular stimulus or set of stimuli, then of course we'll use punishment like criticism, like substituting, like not selecting. These sorts of things would actually weaken the SR bond between the stimulus and the response that the performer's actually producing. Just one second, folks. I'm just going to turn the microphone off just for a moment because I need to sneeze. One moment, please. Okay, guys, sorry about that. Somebody actually told me this morning that people are really suffering from hay fever at the moment. There's a lot of pollen around, and I have to say my eyes are watering and my nose is running. I need to sneeze, so I don't know if that's what I'm experiencing, but there may be other occasions where I need to just take a moment there, so please forgive me for that. I obviously don't plan for that to happen, but this stuff's live, so it can be the case, right? But at the moment, I can barely see my tablet because my eyes are streaming so much. Never mind. Let's move on. I want to talk to you about Thorndike's laws. Now, let me just advise you that if on your course you do study classical conditioning, you do need to think about Thorndike's laws in relation to classical conditioning. Here, we're going to present it more as a general concept which supports our idea of reinforcement within the operant conditioning model. But Thorndike's laws are ultimately also featured in the concepts of classical conditioning. So if it's on your course, just be aware of that. So, all that being understood, let's have a look at the law of exercise. Thorndike, who, by the way, I have some serious problems with, not because of this particular set of ideas, which I think are pretty reliable, but because of the impact that Thorndike, you may not know who Thorndike is, and that's fine, but Thorndike is one of the most prominent educational psychologists that's ever lived. Died a very, very wealthy man, from basically dictating that education should be based on the divergence from the average. Now, I'm not going to go into that in any more detail, but it's a really fascinating area, and I happen to completely disagree with him. But there you go, that's for another day. Now, let's talk about Thorndike and his 3 laws. So he described the law of exercise, and this said something very simple. I think you'll recognize it. Repetition strengthens, there's an R in there somewhere, strengthens the SR bond. So again, if we think that we want to hone, groove, overlearn a skill, this law of exercise states that in effect, that the more we repeat it, and hopefully the correct response to the stimulus, but the more we repeat that, the stronger the SR bond is literally going to become. Okay, so that makes, I think, a lot of sense to us. We've also got the law of effort. Okay, so we've got, guys, this is a mistake. This should say the law of effect. Okay, the law of effect. Okay, so let's get that right. Reinforcement, as we've just talked about it, reinforcement strengthens the SR bond. Now, again, we're not going to be surprised by that, and we already know that specifically it's positive reinforcement which strengthens or weakens it. And of course, what we're talking about weakening the SR bond, we're talking about a form of punishment that would do that. And then we've got what we call the law of readiness. And the law of readiness states, learning occurs only if the nervous and muscular system systems are mature enough. Okay, are mature enough. Okay, so let's hope that that's the case. So, but what it means there, in terms of the law of readiness, what we're saying there is that the practice conditions and the response which is expected from the learners needs to be at a level which is at the physical maturity of the individual concerned. So, of course, if we're looking for a correct throwing technique and we hand an 8-year-old an 800-gram full-size javelin, of course, that's not going to work particularly well because they're not going to be of the physical maturity in their muscular nervous systems to produce that outcome. So we've got to take that into account also. All right, so we've got some nice work there. Let's have a look at our practice questions, and we've got these in place already. Okay, so let's have a little look, guys. I'm afraid I'm going to need to pause again. I'm so sorry. Okay, sorry folks, that isn't good, right? Okay, let's have a look at this question. Explain how is our command. Explain how. So again, we already know with explain how questions, we're going to be using terms like through. Well, so-and-so happens through the following. We're going to be using terms like by. This happens by the following. That's how we explain how things. We may also use therefore, comma, this means. This kind of language is going to be very common in this type of answer. Explain how Tom's coach could use a knowledge of operant conditioning to improve his volleying technique. So we want to apply it to volleying in this case, so we want to give some examples of that, but how could operant conditioning actually be done in that way? And I've prepared the answer in advance for you. So if you're actually, even if you're watching this live, you can actually pause on the DVR. When I put this answer in here, you might just want to pause and have a read of it, especially if you're on demand. If you're on the live stream, of course, you may want to keep up with me talking about it and doing it that way. But as I put it in, I'll just take a couple of moments of silence just for you to have the opportunity to pause that. Okay, so let me have a little look. I mean, if you're on the live stream, just hang on and we'll go over it together, all right? So I'm assuming you've had a read of that, or if you're on the live stream, you haven't, and you just wait for me. But let's go through, explain how Tom's could use a knowledge of operant condition to improve his volleying technique. So the coach could do this by, and okay, I'm in explain how mode, manipulating the environment. There's one of our key pieces of language from operant condition. We're looking for 4, by the way. So that Tom's volleying technique is shaped, behavior shaping, to being correct through trial and error learning. So I'm getting all of my key language into my explanation of how this will be done within this environment. Okay, an example, and we want to relate it to Tom's volleying, of course, could be placing a marked area on the court, which is where Tom should volley from. Now, I might get a mark for that. I'm shaping the environment so we've got Tom's kind of volleying position correct. Or placing targets on the court where Tom should be aiming. I'm shaping his behavior. I may well be getting my mark for that. This means he strengthens the correct SR bond. Okay, and let me give it for that one and I'll get my max. So what have I done there? I've used my key language to explain how Tom's coach could do this, and I've given examples from the specific area that I've been asked to talk about. So again, I think that answer would actually be worth, if there was 6 available, I'd probably get 6. But in this case, I'm looking to pick up 4. I've got at least 4 key terms which are related to the content, and I've related those in a practical example which is relevant. Okay, justify. Justify is a really interesting command word, okay? With justify, we're tending to say things like the reason for this, the reason for this. We can say things like I believe. You can say things like, it's one of the only commands that allows you to do this actually, I think, another reason, and so on. Okay, so this is the kind of language we're using in a justify question. Justify the use of operant conditioning in the coaching of tennis to beginners. So we're specifically looking to justify with operant conditioning for beginners. So we have to almost find criticisms in other theories which operant conditioning kind of fixes for us. Let's see what we've got. Let's see what we've got here. So let's see. Let's uncover the same here. I'll just pause for a second as I put the answer in. So, I'm assuming you've read that if you're not just following live. So the reason for this, so I'm in my justify model, the reason for this, just the orange doesn't have significance other than it's kind of like it's language of the key skill. The reason for this is to create and strengthen the correct SR bond. So create and strengthen the correct SR bond. Okay, let's just link those two things up. Another reason is the operant condition does not require intrinsic feedback. So we do not need the performer requiring the intrinsic feedback, which of course beginners don't yet have. They don't yet have the intrinsic feeling of the correct skill, nor an understanding of the skill. So they don't need an understanding of the skill, which of course cognitive stage learners often don't have. And novices have not developed this yet, as I just said. Because of this, the coach can manipulate the environment to shape the behaviors of the novice learner. Okay, and there's our max. I'd probably get a mark there if I needed it, but I've got my 4. So I'm clearly justifying the use of operant conditioning, clearly for beginners. I'm using my key language within the answer. So it's actually a nice summary at this point, right? Can you use your key topic language to get to the answer within the skill that's been requested of you within the question. You might notice when I do these things, I'm really specific. If I'm asked to explain how, let me tell you, I'm explaining how. If I'm asked to justify, I am justifying. If I'm asked to describe, which I think we might have one in a minute, I am going to describe, okay? I am going to perform that skill. And hopefully that is exactly what your exam board is expecting, because of course if they've put it in the question, one would like to think that that is the skill that you're going to be honoured for. Now, you might say to me, well, James, it doesn't matter. I don't get any marks by saying by or through or this means. That's true. But the way it works for me is the answer in this case is that I'm thinking through a paradigm, like a modality, a mode. I'm explaining how, and it draws out of me the key knowledge which is relevant to that question. So you might want to think about, even when you learn something new, you study university or do something next year or whatever, or you're preparing for one of your other exams, you might want to think, right, here's the key content relating to a particular topic area, right? How does that work? Or how does that influence? Or how can that be applied? When you're thinking about something like evaluation, say, like you might ask your teacher, Miss, Sir, whatever you call them, what are the disadvantages of this? Are there any weaknesses to this theory? If you're not asking those questions, you're not preparing to, for in this case, in this example, evaluate. For teachers out there, if we're not building in the skills of asking questions like how, why, are there any weaknesses, what's the disadvantages, what's the advantages, if we're not building those into our classroom experiences, we're not preparing our students to perform these particular skills. So that's something we all need, I think, to reflect on and focus on. Something that I've been doing a lot better in my own teaching in recent years. Anyway, I'm banging on. I'll stop there.
we are back, and we have tissues. That was a bit of a fake one just then, but I just wanted to share the pain a little bit. Anyway, any questions, Marta? I kind of want to, I know we're doing this for free for people and what have you, but I kind of want to apologise for that because I got really distracted in that bit and I wasn't feeling very good, so I feel a bit guilty. I hope it was okay for everybody.
Hay fever can be distracting.
It is distracting. I can't see.
But I'm sure many students share your pain because I'm sure that many students are being affected by hay fever as well.
It's possible. I don't know why. I don't normally suffer from it, so it's quite a surprise. But yeah, as I was with the cameras, I literally couldn't see what I was doing.
You're human after all, James.
So, yeah.
You're only
anyway,
human.
Never mind. My handwriting is bad enough at the best of times. Never mind. Go on, fire away.
Right. So, James, can you please clarify for me the point about the law of readiness? What does this all mean, that learning occurs only if the nervous and muscular systems are mature enough? I'm not quite sure I understand.
Okay, so the idea of that is, I mean, I guess it applies mostly for the consideration of the coach or the trainer. They need to think about if someone's coaching or training cricket, say for argument's sake, and they're training bowlers to bowl overarm for the first time. Perhaps their learners are 11 years old. Let's choose a number. If you used a size, I think it's 5.5 cricket ball, that's going to not fit in the hand very well. You know, they're going to be holding, it's going to be too big for the hand, so they want to use a smaller ball so they can grip it properly, and then they can produce the technique which is being asked of them. So of course the situation, the manipulation of the environment needs to take into account the biological state of the individual. So that is a muscular, I mean, in the case I've just given, it's also a skeletal factor, of course, but we have to have the muscular, the neuromuscular system capable of, for example, producing the relevant amount of force through strength type movements to propel a heavy object. An individual might need to be flexible enough to produce a certain dynamic movement, for example. So those guys, in that sense, that's what we mean by physical and neurological maturity. So there's no point teaching somebody or asking someone to learn something which they're not physically yet capable of doing, and that's what we mean by readiness. So what Thorndike, my mate, means by readiness.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but I suppose there are other factors that would also influence to whether someone can or can't do something.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, that's just one of that's just a factor identified by Thorndike. I mean, there's all the psychological processes, all the motivational processes, there's all of the attentional processes that would be a factor as well. But this is purely to do with is the response appropriate for the stimulus? Can a bond be built between the two? And we need physical maturity in order for the appropriate response to be associated to the appropriate stimulus.
I see.
Sure?
Yes. Okay, brilliant. And then can you also explain what negative reinforcement is, please?
Yeah. Okay, so I found over nearly 20 years of teaching this stuff that negative reinforcement is something that students get confused about time after time after time. We think of negative reinforcement as a criticism of something.
I suppose it's got the word negative in it.
So think about criticism as punishment. Now, when we say punishment, we're not talking about beating. I suppose theoretically it could be sort of like an act of violence, but we wouldn't use that obviously in a coaching situation. But punishment is where you use a direct criticism or a bond breaker. So what we mean by that is you would use something like you would deselect a player or an athlete because they had produced a certain behavior or technique, or perhaps they'd acted in a certain way. So that would be a form of punishment. Or you might substitute someone. So those would be classic examples. Again, criticizing would be a classic example of punishment. Where negative reinforcement is really clever is if someone has learned something that is an incorrect response to a certain stimulus, or if someone is learning something and hasn't yet associated the correct response to the stimulus, the negative reinforcement can work to break. Let me rephrase that. Negative reinforcement can work to it can be the first act of attaching a particular stimulus to a particular response. So the way it would work would be, let's say to keep my bowling example, let's say I'm practicing overarm bowling, and the first 5 trials I make of it, I flex my elbow, and my coach says to me, James, you must keep your elbow straight. Contract the muscles in your shoulder to bring your arm over the top. And they say that again 4 times, 5 times, and on my 5th attempt, I do exactly that, and I keep my elbow extended rather than flexed. Okay. What the coach would then do is, first of all, they'd apply negative reinforcement by switching off the coaching point or the criticism. So that's negative reinforcement, and that would have effectively, it would build the bond between the stimulus and the correct response. And then, of course, what they're quite likely to do, because they're likely to be human, is to say, well done, do that again. And that would strengthen with positive reinforcement. So negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement are typically used together. Okay, positive reinforcement can be used in isolation, but negative reinforcement typically is used in combination with positive reinforcement, because when the performer first gets it right, gets the correct response, negative reinforcement is applied, and then positive reinforcement stimulates further that bond between the stimulus and the response.
So in this case, the words positive and negative don't mean something good and something bad, or something something good and something critical.
I mean, giving something and taking away.
Exactly. So in the positive, there is that reinforcement. In the negative, there's the lack of it.
There's
so
a lack of reinforcement. It just happens to be that seconds later, we typically replace it with positive reinforcement.
But negative should be understood as lack of.
Lack of, yeah. That would be. I've never thought about it that way. Actually, that would be a nice way to think about it. You could teach PE, Marta.
Thank you. No, because that's what was confusing me a little bit. Why is it negative reinforcement? Because you expect it to be something like criticism, but no, because that's the punishment. So I think that's probably what makes it confusing.
Yeah.
So it's much clearer now.
All right, good stuff.
Brilliant.
We've got quite a big chunk to do, so we should move on, I think. Oh, sorry. Fire away.
We've got a picture that's. Let me just get it here. So Esme has sent this picture of, I suppose, herself and her friends working really hard in their revision,
that's
having a bit of a break possibly as well.
Hydrating, a couple of them along the way there. I'm a big respecter of any kind of hooped striped pencil case as well. A big fan of pencil cases in general.
So yeah.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
I just realised the James
my
Sims
name on
title is there all the time. Has been there all the time.
That's definitely not them.
Brilliant.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Esme. That's really kind of you to send that, and we really appreciate it. Do we know what school they're at, or college, I should say?
I don't think so.
Let's ask
I'll have a look.
Let's just drop us a tweet, and Mike can pick that up for us. Just let us know which school or college you're at, guys. That would be appreciated. Okay, we should get started. Otherwise, Esme and mates are going to be late home.
Okay, let's
Ready?
go.
All right, cool. Let's go.
Okay, let's have a look at social learning theory, or what we're going to call, probably from here, the theories of observational learning. So, a couple of things just to get us sort of started off the bat. We probably already know that this is strongly influenced by the work of a psychologist called Albert Bandura. Very, very well renowned, very well respected, still going. And this predominantly is around his work and his writing. Okay, so just a couple of things I'd also say about that. Bear in mind that we sometimes call it situational learning. So you may see this term. Don't be too sort of surprised if that happens to you. We can even, on occasion, see it labelled as environmental learning. Okay, so just be prepared for those terms, just in the case of a stinker of a question where they use that language rather than social learning or observational learning theory. Okay, so just in case. Now, the main point I want to get to is to say the following, and is to say that people, according to this theory, people learn by observing others. By observing others. Okay, fine. People learn by observing others. That seems to make sense. And we'd also say that this is what we'd call contrary to the behaviourist theories. And we, of course, just have looked at one behaviourist theory in the form of operant conditioning, but there are others. Piaget, fraud. That was a Freudian slip. Piaget, Freud, classical conditioning. These are classic examples of behaviourist theory. So observational learning is a divergence away from that sort of notion that we learn like a computer. Okay, so let's think about it in that way. Now, I just want to quickly address the ideas of others. Who are others? Well, we want to understand that others are what we would call models. So you notice here we've said that we learn from observing others. Well, who are these others? Well, they're models. We can describe them as role models, so feel free to build that language into your answer. It is the process itself is called modeling. Okay, so we model our behavior on that of others, and we can refer to it as significant others. So significant others are going to be classic examples, going to be people like parents, of course, but it can be a respected sports coach or teacher, for example. Will model our behavior on these particular individuals. And I also want to develop one other aspect of this before we get into Bandura's model, and that is the notion of the demonstration. So I want to quickly talk about the demonstration itself, because of course as soon as we look at observational learning, it makes us as sort of sports scientists think directly towards the role of demonstration within the learning experience of learners within coaching. So a couple of things about demonstration. First of all, it is the creation of a visual image, which is great. Okay, so demonstration helps the learners to create a visual image. Link that to cognitive stage learners and the need for the visual or the mental picture, if you like. We also want to think about with the demonstrator needs to provide a message which is relevant to the learner. Okay, so it's important that the demonstration is something that the learner actually values. So I don't know, is this a bad example from a sports science perspective, but a relevant example for us today? Me demonstrating these theories to you now, a few days away from your exam, probably feels quite relevant, right? If I was to tell this to you, I don't know, when on your 50th birthday, when you're not thinking about these things anymore, or maybe you will be, but you know what I mean? It's probably going to be a lot less relevant, and the demonstration is going to be less meaningful to you, I guess. Okay, and it's the same with sort of a sporting demonstration. Is the technique or the behavior which the model is representing, is it relevant to the learners? Are the learners applying it in their sporting context? Do they want to learn it? So that, of course, is important. We want to take into account what we call the accuracy factor of the demonstration, and what we mean by this is what is the quality of the demonstration. Okay, does the demonstration produce the correct technique which can be then copied? Other points about the demonstration, we're interested in the status of the model. Okay, and what we mean by that is that if the model who's doing the demonstration is well respected by those observing, then it's more likely they're going to take that on. We've already talked about the law of readiness today, but we're talking about as well physical and mental readiness. So what I mean by that is the demonstration which is being provided, are the learners actually in a physical and mental ready state to receive that information and to reproduce that movement? And again, we talked about the law of readiness with Thorndike a little bit earlier on. Unless you're watching this on demand later and you don't know what I'm talking about, have a look at the section I did where we looked at operant conditioning. And finally, it's based on the motivation of learners, more of which in a second. Okay, so demonstrations are effective when learners are motivated to actually observe the demonstration. Now, all that being said, Bandura designed a 4-part theory. So let's see it in its spectacular, glowing beauty over here. And the first thing I want to say to you, guys, I'm really, really struggling with my watering eyes. I'm really going to need to ask for your patience here. Please forgive me, because I can barely see my screen. My handwriting is likely to be really shocking. We do these things live, so the conditions are the conditions. I'm afraid I'm doing my utmost to get this right for you. Okay, so these two features of Bandura's model are what we call the perceptual features. Okay, so this is perception, interpretation of the environment. Think of the DCR process. These are perceptual features, whereas these two features down here, these are what we refer to as psychomotor features. So here, first of all, we're just going to separate our 4-part model into 2 chunks of 2. It's a nice way, and we'll come back to that point in a moment. But what we want to do really is we want to focus, what we're saying here is that attention really needs to be drawn towards the demonstration that's been done. How do we draw attention of the observers to the demonstration? And these are the key points that I would get across to you. First of all, we need to combine demonstration with what we call CPs. They are coaching points. So we draw it. So here's my demonstration of a perfect tennis serve. Unlikely coming from me, but there you go. So here's my demonstration of a perfect tennis serve. Now note the angle of my elbow as I draw my racket back. Can you see how that improves the quality of the tension to a feature of the demonstration? Otherwise, I'm looking at this whole movement and I might miss the key factor that the coach wants me to address. So coaching points in combination. Secondly, encourage the performers to avoid distraction. Okay, so avoid distraction. We do not want external noise. We do not want learners looking into the sunlight. We do not want, for example, lots of noise from another coaching session right next to us. We want to avoid the distraction so that the observers can look at the demonstration and not be distracted. We've said already, this is about this point, focus on key aspects. Okay, so that is obviously partly in relation to our coaching points, but with particular parts, we could demonstrate simply the foot placement of a layup technique in basketball, for example. We're not worried about what their arms are doing at this point, just where the feet land. Okay, so that would be an interesting one. Focus on key aspects. We need to encourage our athletes towards the process of selective attention. Remind yourself, this is ignoring what's irrelevant and focusing hard on what is relevant. It is a perceptual feature of our information processing. And of course, we want the demonstrator to be, and we've looked at this already, a significant other. In other words, someone that the observers respect and want to listen from and learn from. Now, retention takes us on to a completely different model. It's all about the quality. So, excuse me a second, guys. It's all about the quality so that the image that the observers have seen is retained in the mind. Okay, so how do we maximize that? Well, first of all, it's a very obvious point. We create a visual image. Obviously, a demonstration is going to achieve that. Secondly, we want things to be really clear. Okay, so clarity is really important to increase retention of the image. So let me just give you what might seem like a very base example. Let's take my tennis serve for a second. Okay, I said I wanted the observers to focus on my elbow angle. Could I wear, for example, a red band around my right elbow, which is my striking elbow, to draw attention and make it clearer that that's what we're talking about? Or have a red sleeve, say, when the rest of me, I don't know, is wearing a black t-shirt or something, to bring attention to that arm. Could we do that? Okay, that would make it work. And we can also do that in that's where things like video analysis work well. And we might actually annotate over a demonstration. Look, here's the arrow pointing to the elbow, for example. So these things work. Now, I've already touched on this. Brightness. It might sound like a really base point, but we make the image more retainable by making it bright. We also encourage performers to go through the process of mental rehearsal before they go through physical practice. And you'll actually see this. This is a classic, right, where you demonstrate something, let's say in a PE lesson to a group of students or a group of learners, or in a coaching session to a group of performers. And those performers will, before they go and practice it, will actually run through that episode in their mind. You might even sort of see them mimicking an arm movement or a foot movement. Mental rehearsal helps with retention. And as we've said already, and I'm running out of space, I'll put it under here, we need to combine the image with what we call verbal guidance. And again, I come back to the notion up here of coaching points. Let's move on to motor reproduction now, into the psychomotor side. We've said already that we need the performers to be physically and mentally ready, or let's put mature, mentally mature. Okay, so we mean by that whatever's being asked of the performers when they go and reproduce the skill, practice it, they have to actually physically and mentally be capable of doing that. Otherwise, it's going to lead to failure, right? So we call that the law of readiness. Okay, so there's a nice link to our Thorndike's laws we looked at earlier on. If you haven't seen that, you need to. The other thing about motor reproduction is it really helps if we develop with the athlete understanding. Now, this is where operant conditioning fails, of course, because it doesn't develop understanding. Oh, guys, I'm so sorry. It doesn't develop understanding in our athletes. Okay, so I'm just trying to wipe my eyes clear of. My eyes are watering terribly. My physical maturity, or my physical readiness to do this at this very moment is not quite right. Just bear with me a second, guys. I don't want to disturb you with loads of sniffling noise. It must be disgusting. So we've got the need to develop understanding. And of course, one of the ways we do this is that athletes, as they're practicing, need feedback. Okay, they need feedback. Okay, so as the performance is going, lots of external, extrinsic feedback coming from the coach. Okay, now I'm going to use kind of a blue colour to do this yellow because it's not going to work on the white. So let's have a look at the idea of motivation. Motivation to reproduce and repeat the skill. We know about the law of effects and the need for repetition. So of course we are looking here for reinforcement. Reinforcement increases the tendency for performers to repeat the performance because they're motivated to do so. So we need to use reinforcement. Therefore, things like praise are super important. And we need to increase drive. Let me rewrite that. Increase drive. Okay, so part of increasing drive is, as what we've said before, make it relevant, make it clear, make it enjoyable, make sure that the performers are ready to perform this thing. But one way of increasing drive is to say that you need to repeat this thing. And that, of course, leads to this increasing in motivation to reproduce the skill in the form of repetition. So this is Bandura's model. It's quite a comprehensive model. It works. And guys, I'm just going to take the briefest pause before we do the answer demonstrations, because I need to just blow my nose and things. Just bear with me a second. So this is going well, huh? I do apologise, folks. I mean, I am genuinely doing my best here. I'm sure you realise. Okay, let's have a look at some practice questions. Making reference to Bandura's social learning theory, which we know about, we're being asked to describe, more of which in a second, describe the factors that would make a demonstration effective to help Tom improve his ground strokes. So, look, on the idea of describing, first of all, we need to use language such as is characterised by. That's indicative of describing. Is composed of. We say things like is like. We say things like is not when we're talking about the opposite. This is what we do when we're describing. Notice I'm not using things like because. Notice I'm not using things like therefore, comma. This means. Okay, I'm describing this thing. I'm not being asked to explain how and why. I'm describing it. Describing means give the main details, to give the main details. So it's a nice thing to realise, because describing, therefore, is quite a straightforward skill that we can get lots of marks for quickly. Well, marks for quickly, about lots of marks, but we can get marks for quickly because we can give the characteristics of what it is we're talking about. In this case, the factors that make a demonstration effective. And of course, we already know that the factors that make a demonstration effective is this bunch of stuff over here. Okay, so we can get that into our answer. So let's have a little look at what we've got. So let's put the answer in. Again, I'll pause for a moment so you can have a read, okay? So I'm assuming you've had a little read of that. You may have paused, you may not have, so let's assume that you have. If you need to pause for a bit longer, well, you can even pause it on the live stream if you need to. According to Bandura, so I'm just making my reference to Bandura. I mean, it is not going to get me any credit, but there you go. People learn from observing others demonstrate behaviour. So I'm saying this is what Bandura's main argument was. Would I get a mark for that? Let's give myself benefit of the doubt. Good demonstrations are characterised by, look, are characterised by, so here are the characteristics, the accuracy factor and the status of the role model, as well as the relevance to the learner. Now notice, I wasn't asked explain how you would make a demonstration most effective, in which case I'd say make the accuracy factor as high as possible, make it hyper accurate, make the status of the role model as high as possible, make the relevance to the learners as relevant as possible. I'm asked to describe the factors that would make a demonstration effective, including their physical and mental readiness. I'm probably going to get credit there if I wasn't already at max. Okay, so I'm using my descriptive language to describe, in this case, through giving the characteristics of the factors. Okay, what are the factors that would make demonstration effective? Okay, so that's a nice answer. I'm giving the characteristics. I'm not going on to evaluate. I'm not going on to analyze. I'm not going on to compare. I'm describing. And if that's what I'm asked to do, that is what I'm going to do. Now, this is a different situation altogether. And by the way, we have not got enough space in this particular sheet of paper here to write a whole 15 or 20 mark response. Okay, however, we've been asked the question here to evaluate. Can I remind all of you that when we evaluate, we are saying things like a strength is, a weakness is, one advantage is, on the one hand. So this is all indicative. On the other hand, this is all indicative of the fact that I am thinking through an evaluative lens. Okay, so I'm giving strengths, weaknesses, advantages, disadvantages. I'm saying things like however. So on the other side of things, however, comma. I'm saying things like comma space, whereas, and so on, comma space, whereas. I'm using this language to give both sides of an argument. So we must look at a concept from both directions, from the positive and from the negative. Now I'm going to give you a sample part of some sentences which could feature in this question. Evaluate Bandura's social learning theory as a model for explaining how people learn movement skills. So I'm simply going to give you 4 or 5 sentences which are going to be contained within this example. And of course, what you then need to do is you need to take that skill of evaluating and you need to discuss that with your teacher. Right, teacher, do I need to give a full description of the theory? Do I draw it out as my first thing? Do I go through each of the stages? And that varies on which exam board you're studying on. Now, for me, what I would do here is I would put all of my knowledge down around social learning theory in the structure of an evaluation. Okay, that would be my model. That's how I would write this answer. But for now, let's just have a little look at some examples. So let's have a look at sentence number 1. A strength of Bandura's model. So I'm immediately evaluating. Notice I haven't bothered with an introduction here. A strength of Bandura's model is that it explains how a learner goes from observing a demo all the way to motivation to repeat that behavior. A weakness is that it does not take into account how behavior shaping can influence learning. So let's just think about that for a second. I'm saying that a strength of it is that you watch a demo and you go all the way to the motivation. So Bandura explained all of that, and that's accurate. But a weakness is that it doesn't describe behavior shaping. Okay, so it doesn't describe the behaviorist stimulus response bond ideas that we looked at, for example, through operant conditioning or classical conditioning, if you study that one too. So we've clearly got an evaluative statement there. We've clearly got an evaluative statement. Let's have a look at another one. On the one hand, Bandura clearly describes how people learn from vicarious experiences. New term for us. Vicarious experience means learning through the process of modelling on others' behaviours. In fact, I should have written it up here. Let's do that now. So let's put that in here. From others. We call this vicarious experiences. Vicarious experiences. We should have written that in there, really. Vicarious experiences. So Bandura explains this. He says, on the one hand, Bandura clearly describes how people learn from vicarious experiences. On the other hand, it fails to acknowledge the role of innate abilities. So this theory does not recognize ability or innate factors as features of how people learn things. Okay, now it depends on how you stand on that, but it's certainly a weakness of the theory. It doesn't actually identify those possibilities at all. Let's have a look at another evaluative statement. I'm going to show you 4. A strength of the theory is it separates attention and retention into perceptual process, and motor reproduction and motivation into psychomotor processes. Okay. However, it takes no account of the individual's personality type. Okay, so I'm clearly making an evaluative statement which is beyond just describing this theory. Within this answer, I'm almost certainly going to describe the theory as well. I'm going to say the 4 stages are: a demonstration is effective by, and so on and so on. Make sure you get your coaching points for attention. Make sure it's bright and clear for attention, and so on, all those points. But I've got to make my evaluative statement. Could an example of an evaluative statement be that Bandura stated that demonstrations are effective, so the strength is that demonstrations can cause learning. However, a weakness is that the demonstrations need to be bright and clear for the demonstration to be effective. There's a classic example of an evaluative statement, and we keep going and we keep going and we keep going. Now, what we always do at the end of an evaluative question or evaluative answer is we always place a conclusion. So I've just made a little conclusion here. In conclusion, Bandura's theory does an excellent job of explaining the role of vicarious processes, but must be viewed in combination with other learning theories. Okay, so that's my conclusion. It must be viewed in combination with other learning theories. Now, let me just repeat to you, nobody have a go at me for saying that is a whole 20 mark or 15 mark answer. No, I'm giving you a sample of some of the sentence structures that I would hope that you would use within a response to that. I repeat again, I'm not going to bore you by taking this and this and this and this and placing it just by describing it into the answer. I want to show you how we take those things and form them into evaluative statements, and that is the higher level skill, of course, is to form them into evaluative statements. So if you have a look at how I've done that within that part answer, you can get a bit of a clue for that. Do remember that you must make a conclusion with an evaluation question. I think if you get like a question which asks you to evaluate for 4 or 5 marks, you probably don't need to do a conclusion for that. But if certainly in your extended writing, you must make a conclusion. Things like analyze questions don't really lend themselves to conclusions, because when you are analysing, we're breaking down and explaining things. Here, we've got to make some kind of judgment at the end because it's an evaluation. Okay, so we encourage you to do that.
Well, that went well.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Oh, your eyes.
Glassy. How are we doing?
Yeah.
Any
Good.
Questions?
No, not really.
Oh.
We haven't got any questions, no.
What about the school from earlier?
Oh, yes.
From Esme, wasn't it?
Esme, yes. We found out what school she's from.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have to say it? Okay.
Yeah.
A school different.
Yeah.
Ogwan.
Ah, that's a Welsh school.
It is.
They're
a
in
Welsh
North
school.
Wales too.
Yes.
And you guys are in. Where are they? In Bangor, I think. Bangor, North Wales. I think I could be wrong. I used to live in North Wales, and I went to school in North Wales. I studied in Welsh for a little while. Well, no, let me rephrase that. I studied Welsh. I was an English guy. I'd moved to North Wales when I was 13, and I went into Welsh classes for a little while. So I'm going to say to you, prynawn da. My accent's really, really bad. Prynawn da. Diolch am eich neges. Diolch am eich neges. Prynawn da. Okay, that's all my Welsh. I don't ask for any more because that's pretty much all I've got.
It's good, impressive.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, I don't want to offend anyone by time, I'm a big fan of a minority language. I know it's not a minority language in North Wales, it's your language, but to everyone else it's a minority language. So I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I think it's certainly, there isn't enough Welsh around.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with that. It's a beautiful language, and I think it's funny one really, because the GCSE course, for example, it has to be, as I understand it's compulsory in Welsh schools to be available through the medium of Welsh, or at least the exam board WJC needs to be used in Welsh schools. I don't know yet if that's the case with these A-level courses, but I believe it might be, or it might be soon. So I wonder how many of the students that we have are going to be soon studying their A-levels through the medium of Welsh rather than through the medium of English. Quite an interesting one. I think a lot of people don't realise these things are happening in the UK. In North Wales, a real a strong area for Welsh speaking. A lot of proud people and very beautiful linguistic place. I was very bad at Welsh at school, I must add. That is pretty much all I know. I was pretty terrible at it, so everyone was miles ahead of me basically at Welsh in school. So I arrived late and didn't have any background in Welsh, and it got a bit embarrassing in some lessons, if I'm honest. But there you go. Yeah. So that's my Welsh.
Yeah.
That's my Welsh heritage.
Yeah.
Well, not heritage, but my Welsh efforts. So, no questions at all about banjo and observational learning?
No, I think it's all very clear. No, is there anything you think, is there anything that tends to cause problems?
The thing that I've noticed a lot with students is that they can they retain the 4 elements of the model, and they don't take it anywhere. They can't get the details out of each of those areas. So me talking about the brightness to improve retention, these might seem like marginal points, but actually could make all the difference between you getting 4 and 5 marks on a 6-mark question and 1 and 2 marks on a 6-mark question. So I'd really encourage you to go into that detail. Always be prepared to evaluate the model as well. What are the strengths and weaknesses? One of the classic questions you might get on observational learning for me is an analyze question. Break the model into parts and explain it. That would be a classic case of putting an analyze question in there. with social learning theory, observational learning theory. So I would definitely be prepared to do that. And when you come to things like evaluation, be prepared to look at the differences between the theories, and that will often lead you to the strengths and the weakness of each theory. So that's, yeah, I would suggest that's a good one. But yeah, I've often found with students, they go too shallowly into the to the theory base. You must go deeper, and that's why we put all those descriptive points in there. So that would be my encouragement to the students.
So depth is the key.
Depth, yeah. So to get lots of depth in their descriptions, and classic example, explaining how a demonstration should be done. Okay, you're saying it's through those factors we mentioned earlier. How can we increase the retention or storage of a visual image once it's presented at a demonstration? Then we've got all those points about retention. So those would be sort of I would really encourage the students to go into that kind of depth on it. Yeah. Good. Anything else? We're back tomorrow, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
What time are we on tomorrow? Hang on.
4.
1 till 2 for GCSE Spanish, 4 till 5 for A-level, and we're doing a bit of psychology tomorrow. We're doing personality and attitude, and I'm going to go and get an eye test. So personality and attitudes tomorrow. We come back to a bit of skill acquisition for memory models the start of next week, but we're getting there. That's session 12, I think, of 19 in total, so we're well on our way.
Wow.
So we're well on it. So that's 12 hours of 19 hours of revision done, so you guys have got some catching up to do if you haven't seen it all. Okay, all ready?
Mm-hmm.
Super. All the best, folks. Have a good evening. Take care.
The traditional classroom environment doesn't suit everyone. Students that don't fit this pace of learning begin to lose confidence. The problem is, the current learning model has holes in it. Luckily, the EverLearner.com is here to fill those holes. With the EverLearner classroom, each student is given a chance to master each subject at their own pace. With thousands of video tutorials and tens of thousands of automated questions on the site, students can progress at their own individual pace. And because every interaction is tracked within the site, teachers can review students' progress and gain access to razor-sharp data. Teachers will have more time to engage with small groups and be better informed of where their time and support is needed. With the EverLearner, teachers can leave the traditional model behind and become facilitators, coaches, and inspirers. There's a reason we have over 100,000 registered students. To learn more, visit our website today.